Welcome to Just Stories. We hope you enjoy the story. The Fight for Freedom, The Baltic War of Liberation, by Just Stories. Chapter 1, The Struggle Begins. The year was 1918, and the small, newly formed states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania found themselves facing a daunting challenge, the prospect of Soviet occupation. Following the collapse of the Russian Empire in the wake of World War I, Soviet Russia saw an opportunity to extend its control over the Baltic region, which had long been a strategic prize in the eyes of Russian leaders. For the Baltic states, the situation was dire. With few resources and little military infrastructure, they faced the prospect of being absorbed into the Soviet Union without a fight. But the people of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were determined to resist, and the stage was set for what would become known as the Baltic War of Liberation. The early stages of the war were marked by a series of small-scale battles and skirmishes, as the Baltic states struggled to build up their military capabilities and fend off Soviet incursions. The situation was complicated by the fact that many of the soldiers on both sides were former members of the Russian army, who were now fighting against each other in the chaos of post-war Europe. Despite these challenges, the Baltic forces managed to achieve some early successes. In Estonia, a volunteer force known as the White Army succeeded in repelling a Soviet advance on the city of Narva in January 1919, a victory that boosted morale and helped establish the legitimacy of the Estonian government. In Latvia, the situation was more complex. The Soviet forces were better equipped and more organized than their Estonian counterparts, and they quickly seized control of the capital city of Riga in January 1919. However, the Latvians were determined not to give up, and a guerrilla resistance movement known as the Forest Brothers began to take shape in the countryside. Meanwhile, in Lithuania, the situation was even more precarious. The Soviet forces had already occupied much of the country by the time the Lithuanian army was formed, and the Lithuanians found themselves fighting a defensive war against a better-equipped enemy. However, the Lithuanians were aided by a volunteer force of Polish soldiers, who had their own reasons for wanting to resist Soviet expansion into the region. Despite these early victories, the Baltic forces faced a daunting challenge. They were up against a well-equipped and well-trained enemy, and they lacked the resources and infrastructure to mount a sustained defense. Moreover, the war was taking place in the midst of a chaotic and volatile period of European history, with shifting alliances and changing borders making it difficult to predict the outcome of any given battle. But for the people of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the struggle for freedom was worth the sacrifice. They were fighting not just for their own survival, but for the idea that small nations could stand up to larger powers and defend their right to self-determination. And as the war raged on, it became clear that the Baltic people were not going to give up without a fight. Chapter 2, The German Connection. In the early stages of the Baltic War of Liberation, the Baltic states found themselves in a precarious position. They were facing a powerful and well-equipped enemy in the form of Soviet Russia, and they lacked the resources and infrastructure to mount a sustained defense. However, they were not alone in their struggle. Germany, which had just suffered a devastating defeat in World War I, saw an opportunity to extend its influence in the Baltic region by supporting the newly formed states. The German connection to the Baltic states can be traced back to the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, signed in March 1918. Under the terms of the treaty, Soviet Russia ceded large parts of the Baltic region to Germany, which saw the region as a strategic prize in its ongoing conflict with Russia. However, the treaty was short-lived, as Germany's defeat in World War I and the subsequent collapse of its empire left the Baltic region without a clear protector. This created an opportunity for the Baltic states to assert their independence, but it also left them vulnerable to Soviet aggression. Germany saw an opportunity to fill this power vacuum and began to provide military and financial support to the Baltic states. In Latvia, a German-led unit known as the Iron Division was formed to fight against the Soviet forces, while in Estonia, German officers provided training and advice to the Estonian army. However, the German connection was not without its drawbacks. For one thing, the Baltic states were wary of becoming too dependent on Germany, which had a history of asserting its dominance in the region. Moreover, Germany's defeat in World War I and its subsequent withdrawal from the region meant that the Baltic states were left without a clear protector once again. Despite these challenges, the German connection proved to be a key factor in the early stages of the war. German support helped to bolster the Baltic forces and gave them a fighting chance against the Soviet Union. It also helped to establish the legitimacy of the Baltic states in the eyes of the international community, which was closely watching the conflict. However, as the war progressed, it became clear that the Baltic states could not rely on German support alone. Germany's defeat in World War I had left it in a weakened state, and its own internal struggles made it difficult to provide sustained support to its allies in the Baltic region. Moreover, the shifting alliances and changing borders of post-war Europe meant that the situation in the Baltic region remained volatile and unpredictable. Despite these challenges, the German connection played an important role in the early stages of the Baltic War of Liberation. It helped to establish the legitimacy of the newly formed states and gave them a fighting chance against the powerful enemy. However, as the war progressed, the Baltic states would need to rely on their own resources and ingenuity to secure their independence and ensure their survival. Chapter 3: Foreign Intervention. The struggle for independence in the Baltic region during the period of 1918 to 1920 was not limited to just the local forces and the Soviet Union. There was also significant foreign intervention in the conflict, which added further complexity to an already volatile situation. The intervention of foreign powers in the Baltic War of Liberation took several forms. The most significant intervention came from Soviet Russia, which saw the region as a crucial part of its plans for expanding its communist influence. In January 1919, the Soviet forces launched a major offensive against the newly formed Estonian government, which was backed by the German army. The Estonians managed to repel the attack with the help of German reinforcements, but the Soviet Union continued to pose a significant threat throughout the war. The Soviet Union was not the only foreign power involved in the conflict, however. Neighboring Finland and Sweden also provided support to the Baltic states in various forms. The Finnish army provided assistance to the Estonians during the early stages of the war, while the Swedes provided financial aid to the Latvians and Lithuanians. International organizations such as the League of Nations also played a role in the conflict. The League of Nations was founded in the aftermath of World War I with the aim of promoting peace and resolving international disputes through diplomacy. During the Baltic War of Liberation, the League of Nations took an active role in trying to broker a peace agreement between the warring factions. However, its efforts were largely unsuccessful as the conflict continued to escalate. The involvement of foreign powers in the Baltic War of Liberation had a significant impact on the outcome of the conflict. The Baltic states were able to leverage the support of Germany, Finland, Sweden, and other countries to bolster their military capabilities and resist Soviet aggression. However, the intervention of foreign powers also added further complexity to the conflict and made it more difficult to find a peaceful resolution. Ultimately, the intervention of foreign powers in the Baltic War of Liberation reflected the larger geopolitical struggles of the period. The conflict was not simply a local struggle for independence, but was part of a larger global contest between competing ideologies and geopolitical interests. The intervention of foreign powers added further complexity to an already volatile situation and left a lasting impact on the region and its people. Chapter 4: The Turning Point. As the Baltic War of Liberation raged on, the situation for the Baltic states remained precarious. The conflict had dragged on for years, and the shifting alliances and changing borders of post-war Europe made it difficult to predict the outcome. However, there were several key events that marked a turning point in the conflict and helped to shift the balance of power in favor of the Baltic forces. One of the most significant turning points in the conflict came in the form of the Battle of Vanu, which took place in Latvia in June 1919. The battle pitted the Latvian forces, aided by Estonian and British troops, against the Soviet forces in a fierce battle for control of the city. The battle was a decisive victory for the Latvians and helped to establish the legitimacy of the Latvian government in the eyes of the international community. Another significant turning point came in the form of the Tartu Peace Treaty, signed between Estonia and Soviet Russia in February 1920. The treaty brought an end to the fighting between Estonia and the Soviet Union and recognized the independence of the Estonian state. This was a major victory for the Estonians and helped to establish their legitimacy as a sovereign nation. In Lithuania, the turning point came in the form of the Battle of Warsaw, which took place in August 1920. The battle pitted the Lithuanian forces, aided by Polish troops, against the Soviet forces in a fierce battle for control of the Polish capital. The battle was a decisive victory for the Lithuanians and Poles, and helped to establish the legitimacy of the Lithuanian government in the eyes of the international community. However, the turning point in the conflict was not just a matter of military victories. It was also a matter of diplomacy and international recognition. Throughout the conflict, the Baltic states had struggled to establish their legitimacy in the eyes of the international community and had faced opposition from powerful neighbors such as Germany and Russia. However, by the end of the conflict, the Baltic states had gained significant international recognition for their struggle for independence. The League of Nations, which had initially been reluctant to get involved in the conflict, had come to recognize the legitimacy of the Baltic states and had supported their right to self-determination. The turning point in the Baltic War of Liberation marked a significant shift in the balance of power in favor of the Baltic forces. It was a testament to their resilience, determination, and bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. Ultimately, it paved the way for the establishment of independent states in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and helped to shape the geopolitical landscape of Europe for years to come. Chapter 5: Aftermath and Legacy. The Baltic War of Liberation was a significant event in the history of the Baltic region and had far-reaching consequences for the people and nations involved. As the conflict drew to a close, the region was left with a legacy of struggle, sacrifice, and resilience that would shape the course of its history for years to come. One of the most immediate consequences of the conflict was the establishment of independent states in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The war had been fought with the aim of securing the right to self-determination for these nations, and the victory of the Baltic forces paved the way for their independence. However, the establishment of independent states was not without its challenges. The new nations faced the daunting task of building stable governments, developing their economies, and forging a sense of national identity. They also faced ongoing geopolitical struggles, as powerful neighbors such as Germany, Russia, and Poland sought to exert their influence in the region. The aftermath of the conflict also had a profound impact on the people who had lived through it. The war had been a time of great hardship and sacrifice, with many families losing loved ones and communities being uprooted. However, it had also been a time of unity and solidarity, as people from different backgrounds and regions came together to fight for a common cause. The legacy of the Baltic War of Liberation can be seen in the ongoing struggles for independence and self-determination in the region. The conflict had established the idea that small nations could stand up to larger powers and defend their right to sovereignty. This legacy has continued to inspire movements for independence and autonomy in the region, such as the recent push for independence in Catalonia and Scotland. Moreover, the legacy of the conflict has helped to shape the identity of the Baltic nations themselves. The struggle for independence and self-determination has become a defining feature of their national histories and has helped to foster a sense of pride and resilience among the people of the region. In conclusion, the aftermath and legacy of the Baltic War of Liberation were complex and far-reaching. The conflict had established the legitimacy of the Baltic states and paved the way for their independence, but it had also left a lasting impact on the people and nations involved. The legacy of the conflict continues to shape the geopolitical landscape of Europe and to inspire movements for independence and self-determination around the world. Thank you for watching our story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss out on our next video.